Hello?
911, what's your reporting?
We were a couple of hikers stuck out in the Barclay area. What mountain is this? Bering Mountain. And we have fire all around us, and we can't get out.
This is the face of a hiker who's currently standing face to face with death. What was supposed to be a fun peak bagging adventure for Steve Cooper and Matt Bishop quickly turned into a literal fight for their lives when they became trapped right smack in the middle of a forest fire raging through the Washington state wilderness.
Oh, that came fast, dude.
The fire was spreading so fast that they had no time to react and no possible chance of outrunning it. As the smoke got thicker and thicker and breathing became harder and harder, the two men made a last-ditch effort and called 911. The dispatcher told them to hang tight and that he would call back shortly. The men tried to keep themselves calm, but I mean, at this point, their family members had been alerted about the dire situation they were in, and for those family members, keeping calm was all but impossible.
911, what is the location of your emergency?
My best friend's husband is trapped by all of the fires, and so she's freaking out.
The men waited and waited, and then finally, they received a call back from search and rescue. Cooper and Bishop were told that it was far too dangerous to attempt a rescue and that the men were essentially on their own. And thus, when that call ended, so too did their last lifeline. If Cooper and Bishop were going to make it out alive, the only things that they had left to rely on were their legs, their brains, and their lungs. The next decision that they made would almost certainly be a matter of life or death. And so with that in mind, the men got moving. This is the harrowing story of Steve Cooper and Matt Bishop, the nightmare on Bering Mountain.
Hopefully you guys get to see this video because otherwise we didn't make it.
Folks, this story scares the absolute shit out of me, pardon my language, because I was actually in the area when this happened. Those of you that have been following the channel for a while, or those of you that have gone back and looked at my older videos, know that in 2022, I was actually in Washington State on the Pacific Crest Trail, right at the end of like a 2,000 plus mile hike, and I ended up getting off trail because of forest fires. I actually bailed on my PCT through hike at Stevens Pass right there in Washington State. Folks, the 2022 hike is over. We made a decision, we're going home. As of right now, this is the last view of the PCT. Me and my friend Brandon actually almost hiked out that day, but multiple fires had started in the area that very morning, and so we kind of made a last minute decision to just play it safe. And it just so happens that on that very same morning, less than 20 miles away from us, mind you, two men did make the decision to hike out into the Washington wilderness. And to be fair to them, unlike us, they had no prior knowledge of the worsening and even exploding fire situation. If they did, I'm sure that they would have made some different decisions, and well, I wouldn't be making this video for you all today. But alas, early in the morning on September 10th, 2022, Steve Cooper and Matt Bishop parked at the Barclay Lake trailhead in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. Now, these guys were very close friends. They had been hiking together countless times over the years. They were both very experienced hikers. They were competent outdoorsmen, and they felt very comfortable tackling what was actually an unmaintained route that required some like off-trail scrambling. Their ultimate goal was to reach the summit of Bering Mountain. And so they start out, and their hike obviously was normal at the very beginning. Cooper was actually filming that day for his YouTube channel. And so unlike most of the stories that I cover on this channel, there's extensive footage from their ordeal that day. In fact, pretty much all of the B-roll that this video is going to use is going to be real footage that was taken by Cooper and Bishop. You can see them hiking here, and of course, everything looks just fine. They would have had no idea that within just a very short amount of time, they would literally be fighting for their lives. And with that said, obviously this story is about to take a very scary and disturbing turn. And so before it does, I want to make things fun again for just a second longer and tell you about Magic Spoon. That's right, Magic Spoon is the sponsor of this video. They're back and I'm so excited. Now look, if you're looking for like an easy but also high protein and wholesome breakfast, cereal is probably the last item that you would have thought of. Until now. I used to eat cereal when I was a kid. I think we all did, or most of us did anyways, but by the time I became an adult, I had long since given it up because obviously cereal is usually full of sugar, it's full of junk, it's full of stuff that you just shouldn't be eating. That's not the case though with Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon is literally cereal reinvented. It has that great taste that you'll remember from your childhood with more protein and less sugar. Here's the facts. Magic Spoon cereals have 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 net grams of carbs in each serving. And even more importantly than that, Magic Spoon tastes amazing. Here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna click the link below and you're gonna go get yourself some right now. You can actually build your very own custom box with all the flavors that you love. And you're gonna wanna use my code HIKING for $5 off when you do that. They have so many awesome flavors. I guarantee you they're gonna have one that you like. They have flavors like Coca, Fruity, Frosted, Peanut Butter, which is probably my favorite by the way, Maple Waffle. I mean, why even stop there? How about Honey Nut, Blueberry Muffin, Birthday Cake, Cinnamon Roll, and get this, Chocolate Chip Cookie, also one of my new favorite flavors. And you can also add any of their, hold on, you can also add any of their delicious cereal treats just like this to your order. So go ahead, click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen right now and use code HIKING for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/hiking to save $5 off your order today, or do it right now. I love this company so much, and thank you so much to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. So I'm gonna go clean my face off, and after I do that, we're gonna get back to the story. Cut to that. When Steve Cooper and Matt Bishop arrived at the trailhead that morning to start their hike, they did notice that there was a bit of smoke in the air. Now, in hindsight, it's easy to say that maybe they should have turned the car around and drove home right then and there, but the full story is much more complicated than that. Those of you that live in states that frequently have wildfires know just how far smoke can travel through the air. I mean, a fire could be hundreds of miles away, even thousands of miles away, but if the wind conditions are right, that smoke can just carry far, way over to communities and hiking trails for that matter, that aren't in any danger of burning up from the fire. And so when Cooper and Bishop noticed the smoke in the air that morning, they basically just brushed it off. They assumed that it was from a few known fires that were burning further east in the state, fires that were actively being battled. The dirt Forest Service road that they had traveled in on that morning was not closed, it wasn't gated shut, and the men hadn't received or noticed any information about new fires that had popped up closer to their area. There was also at least 7 other vehicles in the parking lot that morning, and so with all that in mind, what did they really have to worry about? Cooper and Bishop climbed up to the ridge that would eventually lead them to the summit of Bering Mountain. And as they made their way up this higher and more exposed route, they began to be absolutely pummeled by wind. I'm sure the wind was annoying, but it wasn't anything that they couldn't handle, obviously. With that said, wind is always a big factor in the spread of wildfires and a potential warning sign that something could go wrong. At this point, the men were definitely hiking through some light smoke, but they hadn't yet noticed any glaring red flags. That unfortunately would not be the case for much longer, however. Now, it's impossible to predict exactly where and when a fire is gonna pop up. However, the government had issued fire warnings for the weekend that Bishop and Cooper were hiking. Dry and windy conditions made it possible that fires would start and spread very quickly. But in Cooper and Bishop's defense, I mean, that time of year in that part of the country, there's pretty much always a serious risk for fires. Summer hiking season always overlaps with fire season, and so you have to accept some level of risk if you're going to go out at all that time of year. And of course, besides the fire risk, summer is the best time of year weather-wise to hike in that part of the country. What would go on to become known as the Bolt Creek Fire had started early in the morning on September 10th, 2022. By 6:30 in the morning, the situation was still developing, but reportedly firefighting resources had been requested at that point. It was quickly becoming apparent that this fire was growing rapidly. And so with that in mind, evacuation warnings were sent out to the public. Unfortunately for Cooper and Bishop, however, these warnings weren't sent out until after 8 in the morning, and by that point, the men were already deep in the backcountry with no cell connection. Cooper and Bishop climbed through an area known as the V-Notch, and then they began their final push up to the summit. I mean, at this point, they were so close, they were making really good progress, and they were also getting really good views of the mountains around them. So they're up there, they're almost at their goal, they're just taking everything in, and then suddenly, one of the views that they came to completely stopped them in their tracks. They were now able to see much further beyond just their immediate area, right? And they couldn't help but notice that about 3 peaks away from them, there was a massive fire. This must have been an awful sight. I mean, they could see these thick columns of smoke rising out of the forest, and perhaps even more concerningly, they could see literal flames. Now, as a hiker myself, seeing flames, I mean, that's panic time. Okay, well, I mean, you don't want to panic, obviously, but I think you know what I mean. If you can see flames, you are in immediate danger, especially when it's as windy as it was on September 10th, 2022. And so once the men realized how bad and how close this fire was, they made the very wise decision to turn around. Even though they were so close to the summit, they turned around and they started heading back for their car.
So we're gonna turn it around. The fire is getting really close to us and we don't feel safe. So we had 500 feet till we hit the summit, but that fire is pretty close. So we gotta jam down.
The men scrambled about halfway back down the V-Notch, and at the same time, the fire scrambled directly towards them. And what happened next is literally a nightmare scenario. I mean, Steve Cooper and Matt Bishop watched in horror as the fire suddenly popped out right below them and completely engulfed their path back to the car. I mean, whew. And so the route that they were following, which had now turned into their escape route, by the way, was completely on fire and completely blocked.
Oh, that came fast, dude.
Cooper and Bishop now had, I mean, they had no choice but to turn around and go back up the ridge towards the summit. Now, I haven't hiked this particular mountain myself, but in case you couldn't tell from the videos and the photos, I mean, this is some difficult terrain. They're scrambling over loose rocks. Their route is incredibly steep. I mean, I'm sure adrenaline had kicked in when they realized how close the fire was, but I mean, just scrambling over all this stuff must have been absolutely exhausting. Not to mention, they're breathing in more and more smoke, which is going to make it harder. I mean, it's just brutal. And before the men turned around and started scrambling away from the flames, Bishop actually sent a very ominous text to his wife, who had noticed the fire herself from down in town earlier. This text read, quote, "We're trapped." Yeah, not the kind of thing you want to be receiving from your husband while he's hiking in the forest during a spreading wildfire. I mean, so while the men were making their way back up the peak, they were going in and out of cell connection. I mean, they're in the mountains. Connection's obviously not going to be reliable. They were definitely in a very dangerous situation. And so while they were scrambling back up, they came to terms with the fact that they had pretty much exhausted all of their options. Therefore, when they found another spot with cell service a few minutes later, they hit the SOS button on their satellite communicator, and they also called 911.
Hello?
911, what are you reporting?
We were a couple of hikers stuck out in the Barclay area. What mountain is this? Bering Mountain. And we have fire all around us, and we can't get out. The trail is completely burnt. The fire's coming up the ridge, and we're up on the ridge trying to take shelter, and there's a fire coming from the opposite direction.
Okay, what trail are you on?
It's the Barkley Mountain. Oh, Bear Ring. Sorry. It's Barring.
How far up the Bering Mountain Trail are you from the?
We are at the last part where we go up to the summit. So it's like a giant rock boulder field. I don't know much of what anyone can do. I mean, it's pretty rugged terrain.
Okay, so I'm gonna get this information out to our search and rescue guys. Leave your phone on because I'll probably want to call you back if you haven't heard from them in 20 minutes or so. Give us a call back, all right?
The operator told the men that search and rescue would be notified and that they should just hang tight and wait for a call back within roughly 20 minutes. And so, with their life on the line, Cooper and Bishop just waited. And they waited, and they waited. They even took this selfie while they waited. Now, as you heard on the 911 call there, the smoke was getting so intense that the men were having trouble breathing. I mean, they were pouring water on their extra shirts, and then they were using those to cover their mouths, as you can see in this photo. I mean, this should illustrate just how desperate they were at this point. Bishop actually sent this photo to his wife, and then he turned off his phone to save his battery. I mean, I can't even imagine what was going through his wife's head when she got this photo, but I do know that she was freaking out. And I'm not just making that up. I mean that she was literally freaking out. She was actually with one of her friends at the time, and this friend ended up calling 911 to try and learn more information about what the hell was going on with Cooper and Bishop.
911, what is the location of your emergency?
Hi, my name is and my best friend's husband is trapped by all of the fires. He was able to text out his coordinates, and so she's freaking out. So,
okay, one moment. I'm going to put you on hold to speak to my supervisor. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, honey.
One
appreciate
moment.
it.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
After waiting for about half an hour, search and rescue finally called the men back, and when they did, they told them some very devastating news. Volunteers from King County Search and Rescue had tried to formulate a plan to come rescue them, and they'd even traveled to the forest, but conditions were just too dangerous for the rescuers to hike into. Cooper and Bishop also learned perhaps some even worse news on this phone call. They learned that it was also going to be impossible for a helicopter to reach them either. The call was basically a good luck, we can't help you kind of call. And so the men were now truly on their own. At this point, they had no remaining choice but to take their lives into their own hands. This is a tough spot to be in because basically whatever decision that they made next would determine if they lived or if they died.
We just got off the phone with 911 in search and rescue, and they cannot rescue us. They said it's too dangerous up here, the wind's too bad. And so we are going to attempt this and get down to the trailhead so that we can get out of here safely. So
the men initially tried to skirt down the side of the V-notch that they had come up, but they quickly realized that the fire and the smoke was just too thick. At this point, they knew that they would need to find an entirely new route down the mountain. And this was not going to be an easy task, by the way. They had no idea how far the fire had spread, and they had no idea what sections of the forest were currently burning or where it was going to burn next. They also knew that following a brand new off-trail route would be very dangerous. They would be bushwhacking, and they could easily reach a dead end, or even worse, a cliff that would basically just stop them in their tracks. But they had to do it, and so knowing that they could be potentially heading right into the fire, they decided to follow an extremely steep and dry creek bed, which would hopefully lead them down the mountain and eventually back to the Barkley Lake Trail. And once they reached this established trail, they just had to follow it back to their car, and hopefully following an actual established trail would be a lot quicker. And so with this plan in mind, they set out, choking on smoke every step of the way, mind you. The men made some progress, but just as I explained a second ago, they did eventually end up being stopped in their tracks by a massive 200-foot cliff. So they're standing at the top of this cliff trying to decide what to do, And as they're doing this, they actually got a very surprising call from the King County Sheriff's Office. Cooper and Bishop were told on this call that a helicopter was actually going to try and rescue them, and that in order for this to happen, they needed to get into an open spot. Cooper was then instructed to hang up the phone and then call 911 in order to get more information. But when he did this, he was accidentally routed to Snohomish County instead of King County. I hope I said that right. Snohomish? I don't know. Snohomish County obviously had no idea what was going on with the men. I mean, they hadn't been involved in this operation until right now.
What I'm seeing here, though, for phase 1 is that you are in Snohomish County.
You know what? I'd like to talk to you, but the fire's coming down. I got a jam.
Okay. Are you able to talk to my supervisor? They may be able to assist you a little better than I can.
Well, I can't stay on the phone. The fire's coming down the ridge, and we got to get off this ridge.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get you over to my supervisor, okay?
All right.
And they'll be able to...
As Cooper attempted to explain his situation to this new dispatcher, Bishop noticed that the fire had started moving up the dry creek bed, going right towards the men. In a moment of, I guess you could say, panic, Cooper actually hung up on the dispatcher and the men scrambled to find a different way down the mountain. This is just so crazy to me. I can't imagine how difficult this must have been for them. I mean, again, they're going down like loose boulders, they're off trail, it's extremely slippery, it's extremely steep. This whole time they have no idea what obstacles are coming next. They're so close to the fire, they're breathing in heavy smoke, they're feeling the heat from the fire as well, and at this point they had completely run out of water. Despite all of these difficulties, the men pushed on, and as they were trying to beat the fire down the mountain, Matt Bishop lost his footing and then almost slid off of another 200-foot cliff. Bishop apparently was just like desperately reaching for tree branches, and by some miracle, he managed to grab one right before he slipped off the edge.
All right. We've been hiking for, I don't know, a really long time to try to beat this fire. We had a lot of accidents, a lot of close calls. No, we haven't died yet, but I watched my best friend almost freaking fall off a cliff. And that was freaking scary.
The men continued on through thick and unforgiving brush before they finally intersected the Barclay Lake Trail. At this point, all they had to do was just follow this wide and easy trail back until they reached the trailhead and their vehicle. The men were completely wiped at this point, but they were almost in the clear. But with that said, they still had no idea where the fire had or would spread to, and so they were still gambling that the short distance back to the parking lot and then the road that they had to drive out of the forest was still going to be untouched by the raging fire. About halfway down the road, the men were met by the sheriff, and at that point, he actually escorted them the rest of the way out. This meant that for the first time in hours, Steve Cooper and Matt Bishop were able to breathe a sigh of relief. They were safe through a combination of grit and also just some dumb luck. The two men had managed to survive. So, anytime I hear a story about hikers almost dying in the backcountry, I always want to know, like, what went wrong? Why did this happen? What mistakes were made? How could it have been prevented? And one of the scariest things about this story is that other than just like refusing to hike at all during the summer in the Western United States, it feels like there isn't really much that could have been done to prevent this. And I'm not the only one who feels like this, by the way. Many of the rescuers who attempted to save Cooper and Bishop that day actually went on record in like local news and stuff to say that the two men didn't do anything wrong. This truly was a wrong place, wrong time type of situation, and that's just incredibly scary. That's not to say that there's nothing that we can learn from this story, however. Searchers were fully prepared to extract Cooper and Bishop via helicopter, and had the men not had any cell service, the only way that they could have called for help was with the satellite communicator that Cooper was carrying. This device was also transmitting the men's location in real time, which allowed their friends and family back home a little bit of peace of mind because they could always tell that the men were on the move and thus still alive. I'll have a few of these satellite devices tagged in the video description. I mean, I think these things are indispensable for anyone who's going to go hiking, so I highly suggest you check them out if you don't already have one. I was absolutely blessed with the privilege of speaking with Steve Cooper. Not only did he reach out to me and tell me about this story, I hadn't heard it before, but he also shared all of his videos and his photos, all those 911 calls with me. And without him, this video would not have came together. And so anyways, I'm talking to Steve and I asked him what he thought could have been done to prevent the situation that him and his friend found themselves in. And he agreed that there wasn't much that could have been done, but that maybe the two men shouldn't have gone out hiking after a red flag warning had been issued. Again, this is tough because these red flag warnings happen all the time. And if you're never gonna hike when there's a risk of wildfires in the Western United States, you're really never going to hike at all in the summer. But I still think it's worth mentioning that. So in my opinion, the biggest lesson here is just how important it is to stay calm when you're in a backcountry emergency, or any emergency for that matter. Cooper and Bishop were in grave danger for hours, and yet you probably noticed in the videos and in the 911 calls, they stayed extremely calm. I'm willing to bet that if they had panicked, they would have made some bad decisions, and they probably wouldn't have made it as a result. So, I mean, hats off to them for how calm they stayed in their actions. I mean, well freaking done, gentlemen. Another big lesson to be learned here is that you cannot ever bank on search and rescue to bail you out. Now, if they give you instructions, you should definitely listen to them, but at the end of the day, you and you only are responsible for your safety, not anybody else. I'm sure that most of you probably understand this already, but this is just such an important point that I really just wanted to drive it home. Search and rescue did all that they could to try and save Cooper and Bishop, and had the men been stranded for longer, I do think that there's a pretty good chance that search and rescue would have eventually attempted to extract them with a helicopter. However, search and rescue is never going to put themselves in grave danger to save somebody else. I mean, they shouldn't have to do that. Cooper and Bishop fully understood that, and after they made it out safely, they even went out of their way to thank search and rescue, and they went on the record to acknowledge that literally the last thing that they wanted was to put any search and rescue volunteers at risk, which I think is very commendable of them. And so speaking of search and rescue, I've made a donation to the two agencies who worked to save Cooper and Bishop. That would be King County Search and Rescue and Snohomish County Search and Rescue. Again, I hope I'm saying that right. I'll have a link to their websites in the description. And remember, these are non-profit volunteer organizations, so I encourage you to please leave a donation as well. And if you do, let me know in the comments. One of my goals is to get this channel to 1 million subscribers, and a whopping 70% of you watching this right now have not yet subscribed to the channel. If everyone who is watching just subscribed right now, just think about how fast I could reach that 1 million subscriber goal. And this is all at no cost to anybody, by the way. It's totally free. So if you appreciate epic videos like this, please hit the subscribe button. And I'd like to say a massive thank you to Steve Cooper for contacting me about covering his story and sharing all the photos and videos. And I guess with that said, if you think you have a good story for a video on this channel, something that went wrong in the backcountry, please send me an email or an Instagram message, and maybe your story can be covered on this channel as well. I'm so thankful that Steve and Matt made it out alive. And with that said, I'll see you guys next week.